Hey guys, I'm back from Southern California, and my first guest post SoCal is a big fish. I have with me Deepak Chopra. Hi, Deepak.
Great to be with you again.
Likewise. So let me just tell you a bit about Deepak if you're not familiar with who he is. He's the founder of the Chopra Foundation and co founder of the Chopra Center for Wellbeing. And how do you pronounce it? Geo?
Jayo,
Jayo.
Jayo.
He is a physician by training. Some people might not know this. Fellow of the American College of Physicians. He's board certified in internal medicine, endocrinology, and metabolism. Endocrinology is actually something that I do in my own work, where I study the effects of hormones in consumer behavior. He's a clinical professor in the Department of Family Medicine and Public Health at UCSD. The next two ones I'm very interested in knowing more about. Adjunct professor in the marketing division at Columbia University. I'll have to hear about that one. Adjunct professor at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. Listed as the 17th most influential thinker in the world, and Time magazine described him as one of the top 100 heroes and icons in the century. Author of 85 books. I don't know how that's possible. I calculated that you would have had to author about 2 books a year. I don't know how you do it. Truly a pleasure to speak with you today,
Thank
Deepak.
you. It's my honor. Thank you, Gab.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to, I guess, begin by telling people how you and I connected, because it's going to speak actually to something quite interesting. So we have a common friend, Michael Shermer, who it's very interesting that you're friends with him, because on the one hand, he is a strong and vigorous critic of some of your work, and yet you're able to maintain a cordial, friendly, respectful relationship with him. And so I thought that in light of the current climate, where anybody who is somehow in a different political aisle from you, he must be a neo-Nazi. Maybe you could explain to us how you can both be friends with someone and vigorously disagree with them.
Well, first of all, the relationship has evolved over several years. So 25 years ago or more, Michael Shermer had me on the cover of his magazine, Skeptic magazine, as basically a pseudoscientist and a charlatan. So, now that was 25 years ago. We still disagree on our basic worldviews, but we have become friends. And I think, one of the rules I go by now is that your worst critics can also be your best friends. So as long as you don't take the criticism personally, you take it as feedback and you say, maybe there's some validity to some of it, if not all of it, then you can have a good relationship with your critics and you can evolve at the same time.
Now, of course, you have millions of fans, but also hopefully a less numerous number of critics. Do any of those detractors ever get to you, or have you reached the stage in your career where, notwithstanding the fact that you pay attention to them, they never get to you emotionally? Are you able to sort of brush them off, no matter how venomous they might be toward you?
Yes, now, but it wasn't always. People like Richard Dawkins always got under my skin because they were very emotional in their attack themselves. And so they got reactivity from me as well in the same kind of inflammatory way. But as I've grown older, I've realized actually with some critics you can engage, like Michael Shermer, and the others you ignore and they can't stand it.
Now, as an endocrinologist, let me see if the following hypothesis might pass your test. Could it also be that as we all age, and certainly in the case of men, since they have roughly 10 times the circulating testosterone of women, that simply by aging, we become somewhat less belligerent toward our rivals? So, for example, I think that one of the best ways to make sure that hardened criminals are somewhat softer is to just let them age. By aging, testosterone goes down and they become softer. So, in addition to you having become more wise, could it simply be the normal endocrinological trajectory that we all must go through?
I'd like to believe that my testosterone is still very high. But there may be something hypothetically to what you're saying. I don't know if anyone's studied that. I think what really happens is if you're self aware and you practice self awareness, then aging allows you to be more reflective. And when you're more reflective, you're not as reactive. So there could be a multiple number of reasons for that.
Got it.
But I don't get triggered by my critics anymore.
Are you very active on social media? Have you embraced the whole, different platforms that are available for you to share your ideas, or not so much?
No, I am active on social media. I have about 3.5 million followers on Twitter, 5 million
Wow.
on LinkedIn.
Wow.
Overall, I reach about 15 million people every day. So when you're done with this interview, I could help.
I bet you could.
I could help promote it on social media.
Well, you're very kind. Okay, so let's get into some of the work. So here I've got a couple of quotes from actually one of my books. Not that I'm trying to plug it, but I think it's relevant to some of the stuff you do. So in one of my books, The Consuming Instinct, in chapter 8, I talk about this idea of marketing hope. And so let me just read you three. So Charles H. Revson, who was the founder of Revlon, quote, said, "In the factory we make cosmetics, in the store we sell hope." Then, of course, Barack Obama became very famous and won a Nobel Prize in part because of his hope and change message. He wrote a book called Audacity of Hope. Napoleon Bonaparte said, "A leader is a dealer in hope." So might it be the case that your success, and this is not a criticism, it's a genuine question, might it be part of your success is the fact that you are so good at offering people hope via your ideas?
Well, it's a very complicated question, and therefore I'm going to give you the best answer I can. I think when I started first writing, I was accused of selling false hope, which I thought was an oxymoron because either you have hope or you don't. I don't know what false hope is. It's a contradiction in itself, the phrase false hope. But my ultimate goal in all my writing is to get people beyond hope, because hope is a sign of despair. You only need hope when you have despair. And I think if you truly understand the nature of consciousness, then it has to be beyond both hope and despair. Now, that may not be the perception of people out there, but it's what I try my best to do, to get you to a place where you don't need hope because you're not in despair anymore, as a result of finding that place within you that is already full of peace. The baseline of all of us as consciousness is the peace that passes understanding. But it's overshadowed by, the dark alleys and the ghost-filled attics of our mind, our memories, and our conditioning. So I hope I'm not offering hope. That's an interesting sentence. That I'm getting people to a place where they don't need hope. Now, having said that, I'm also on the board of Gallup, where we look at what inspires people with leadership skills. Which are the leaders that are more successful, and if they authentically offer hope, trust, stability, and compassion, they are indeed what people are looking for. I remember, I did a fundraiser for Obama the second time he ran for president, and I took him aside and I said, just remember these 4 words: hope, stability, trust, and compassion. And at the end of the evening, he came to me and he said, hope, trust, and what were the other 2? I said, stability and compassion, to which I added also being present, because you were obviously distracted the first time I told you what these were.
How does our current, oh, well, not our current, I'm Canadian, but your current president, how does he score on these four metrics?
He doesn't score at all. I think he's zero.
On all of them?
But what he, on all of them, let's go over them. Okay, trust. Anybody would say that this guy can't be trusted. He's the ultimate con artist. Stability, he changes his mind within the hour. Compassion, just look at all his statements in the last few weeks when it comes to, just everything, just about everything, There's no compassion there at all. And right now, with this white supremacist behavior in Charlottesville, he's, basically totally destroyed himself as far as compassion is concerned. Hope, he did give hope to a few people who were basically in the same state of consciousness as he is. Now, it surprised me that there are a lot of those people in the country because, he did win. And so even if it was marginal, even if he lost the popular vote, he did get a lot of the vote from people who had hope in him to restore what they thought were their values. So that's my answer to the Donald.
Do you have any within your social, I'm assuming your vast social circle, do you have a lot of people who are Trump supporters? And if so, are you able to have conversations with them, not unlike your ability to have conversations with someone like Michael Shermer, where you might vehemently disagree with them, but yet you're able to have an amicable relationship?
I don't have any Trump supporters in my ecosystem. And when I post something which is anti-Trump, which I'm trying not to do, but if you go on my Twitter feed, you'll find a lot of, posts by me criticizing Trump. When I do that, I get a lot of attack, a lot of vitriolic attack from Trump supporters, and I just delete them. It's, easy. You just have to press the delete button.
Or mute or block, as I've learned.
That's right.
All right, let's go back to your work. So
that's what I blocked them.
Yeah, that's right. But then when you block them, they wrongly think that when someone insults you endlessly, if you block them, somehow you're being a hypocrite because you don't, quote, support freedom of speech, which is a grotesque misunderstanding of what freedom of speech is, right? To think that you're allowed to insult me endlessly, and when I decide that I no longer want to be the target of those insults, and so I mute you, that somehow means I'm nefarious in my intent and I don't support freedom of speech. It's simply bewildering that someone could be so confused.
Yeah, they are confused, but I mean, you have a right not to listen, even if somebody's speaking. They have the freedom to speak. But on the other hand, you know what? The next stage of growth is not to block them. Just let them express themselves and let them remain on your Twitter feed. It's not a big deal.
This is where I'll need your help. Next time I'm in Southern California, I'll come visit you and maybe you could help me reach that growth stage. Because usually I'm able to be tempered, but once in a while someone really pisses me off and I go off at them. So earlier today, actually, I went after a guy, a biologist by the name of P.Z. Myers, who had attacked one of my former students. And he got me so upset that I just went on a complete assault mode on the guy. And then subsequently I said, geez, I wish I would have meditated or done some namaste stuff. But you are what you are, right?
But the PZ Myers has attacked me for 30 years now. And so I've kind of developed an immune response to him. And he's not going to change.
I'm suspecting that the focus of the attack will be different between you as the target versus me. I'm guessing in your case, he says, "Oh, you're into pseudoscience and quackery." In my case, what upsets me is that he believes that evolutionary psychology, which is my field, right? I study the evolutionary forces that would have led to the human mind, and then I apply it in all sorts of behavioral contexts. He thinks that evolution is perfectly fine to explain everything except the most important organ that we know, which is called the human mind. So for example, if I use an evolutionary principle to explain the mating behavior of the salamander, then that's perfectly fine. But if I use the exact same evolutionary principle to explain human mating behavior, well, it's just quackery and just so storytelling and so on. So he's got this incredible antipathy to applying evolutionary principles to human affairs.
Yeah, he's very opinionated, and he attacks anyone and everyone who doesn't agree with him, and he makes personal attacks. I've written now 2 books with Harvard geneticist Rudy Tanzi, who's the head of genetics at Mass General. He's a professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School, and we wrote those books in the early days of epigenetics. How
Sure.
how even the way we think and feel and behave influences gene expressions. And he was attacking Rudy as well.
Right. Yeah, he's. I mean, it's difficult for me to understand what is the point of being so bellicose and so cantankerous, right? I mean, you could certainly disagree with people. For example, I have a bone to pick with Bill Nye, specifically regarding one issue. At one point, immediately after the Paris attack, the last Paris terror attack, he came out on Huffington Post Live and somehow tried to make a link between climate change and terror attacks. And that upset me so much because it seemed to me like it was such a departure from reason that I've gone after him. But it's not personal, right? I don't specifically, try to injure the personhood of Bill Nye. I'm attacking his idea. And I wish that you'd say PZ Meyer. In Canada, we say PZ Myers. I wish that he would maybe learn from that. Maybe he needs to go to your retreat.
I think he does. And, I've watched Bill Nye. I've watched him. And, he's a convert to science, as you know. Right. He's not a scientist by training. And converts tend to be fundamentalists.
Right. Let's go back to some of the issues dealing with your work. So you and I are similar in that we're both interdisciplinarian in the following sense. So I'm an interdisciplinarian in that I try to build bridges between the natural and social sciences, right? So I apply evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology to understand human behavior. And so I'm at the crossroad of those two general areas of science. In your case, you try to integrate, Eastern traditions of medicine with Western traditions of medicine. And in that sense, you're building that bridge. And that's all great. One place where, of course, and you obviously know this because you faced this kind of criticism your whole life, one place where there is a danger is when some of this bridge that you're doing no longer adheres to the scientific method, right? Where you make a claim that either can't be tested through science, or if it were tested, it would be falsified. What's your current position on such a detractor?
Well, the current position is very interesting in that I'm questioning the entire premise of science right now as a methodology to understand reality or truth. Science is not a methodology to understand reality or truth. Science deals with models of reality, number one. Science is a method of inquiry. This is the most important thing to realize. It's a very good method for inquiry based on empirical observation. But the premise that science works on, even without stating that premise, is that the world is physical, number one. Number two, there is a subject-object split, even though science may not recognize that. But there's me, and then there's the universe, there's the universe that I examine. Number three, that empirical facts tell us what reality is. But empirical facts are basically modes of knowing and experience in consciousness. And science itself is an activity in consciousness. Scientific theories are conceived in consciousness. Scientific experiments are designed in consciousness. And observations are made in consciousness. And yet science has no explanation for consciousness. Science cannot explain how the brain produces thought or feeling or perception or any experience whatsoever, right? So as you and I are watching each other on the screen, as you and I are speaking, all that's going to your brain is an electrical current. All that's happening in your brain is electrochemistry. But, that happens with any perceptual experience, whether it's sound, touch, sight, taste, smell. We don't know how suddenly the brain produces a three-dimensional reality in space and time with color and tastes and smells and textures and thoughts and feelings and emotions and insight and intuition and creativity and imagination. But science works. I once gave a lecture in Sweden at the same place where they give the Nobel Prize, and I was surrounded by all these Nobel Prize winning physicists and scientists, and one of them said to me, excuse me, how did you get here? I said, I got here on a jet plane. And he said, well, I rest my case. You trust science with your life, but you criticize science. So, because science is very, very successful in creating technology, which, by the way, is an extension of human intelligence. But we cannot explain human intelligence. Evolutionary biology, with everything that it has to say about it, random mutations, natural selection, evolution of species, it has nothing to say about mind. It has nothing to say about consciousness. It has nothing to say about the very fact that our perceptual experience of the world, your visual perceptual experience of the world, is 1/10 of a trillionth of the electromagnetic spectrum. And you call it reality. Okay? Most scientists have never heard of Alfred Korzybski, who was I believe he was a Polish mathematician who was known for his theory of general semantics, but he also used another very interesting word called abstraction, which is, even if you believe that the electromagnetic impulse that's going to your brain through your five nerves, five senses, it produces reality. By the time it gets to your brain, there are 5 levels of abstraction. First, when the light hits your retina. Second, when that is translated into an electrochemical impulse in your retina. Third, when the electrical current goes to your brain. Fourth, when there is translation of that into an electrochemical in your brain. Fifth, when there's that neuropeptide gets to a receptor site, and then suddenly you have an experience of three-dimensional reality, and we say this is what the universe is made of. It's a presumption and actually an audacity to think that the scientific method, as we now know it, has anything to do with reality. It's just an extension of our modes of questioning. It's an extension of our modes of inquiry. And some of the quantum pioneers in the early years did say that, that science reveals to us how nature is, but how nature answers our questions. And where are those questions are being asked? Who asks those questions? What is it that knows your experience of mind, body, and universe? No scientist addresses that.
Let me very gently push back on this. Many of the things that you describe, are explained in a materialistic sense, right? We are able, not fully, we don't have every single understanding of every physical, chemical reaction that results in my smelling what I just smelled with that flower. But theoretically, we should be at some point able to do that. But notwithstanding the fact that consciousness, you're right, we don't have a scientific explanation of consciousness. Aren't you, in a sense, succumbing to a form of the God of the gaps argument where, historically, I know you know this, but this is for our viewers. The God of the gaps argument is that, throughout history, whenever we didn't have an understanding of a phenomenon, well, this is where then God lies. This is where God hides. And at one point, we didn't know how thunder was, what was due to thunder, what was the cause of thunder. So it was God. But then later we revised our understanding. So now, aren't you just going to that final great mystery, which is human consciousness, which you are absolutely correct. We don't have a good scientific explanation for it, and saying, aha, I can't explain human consciousness yet with science, therefore it must not be within the realm of science. What would you say to that?
First of all, over the years, I'm getting away from using the word God. Okay. But because every time you use the word God, it's interpreted by people based on their childhood upbringing, right. How they were introduced to that concept. So I'm getting away from using that. But I think there's no explanation for any experience, period. Whether it's perceptual or it's mental. There's no explanation for any experience. And when scientists talk about the brain correlates of consciousness, they're actually talking about the brain correlates of experience. And even those are an experience. When I look at a brain correlate of experience, that's an experience. So you can't use an experience to explain how an experience arises. I think the fundamental premise where I disagree with all of scientists is they think that the physical reality is the ontological primitive of the universe. Physical reality. And all I'm saying is that what we call physical reality is less than 1 trillionth of what's out there. Your experience of physical reality, what you call empirical facts, are not even 1/10 of a trillion of what exists. There are limitations to the human brain. There are limitations to our ability to know. The scientists frequently, unless they're philosophers of science, they dismiss outright the two most basic things about philosophy, ontology and epistemology. So what's your ontological primitive? Is it something that's physical or is it non-physical? If it's physical, then already science has brought us to the door of the sub-empirical, and we can't go any further. How do you measure something that's not measurable? How do you measure, I'm asking you right now, how do you measure compassion? How do you measure hope? How do you even measure a thought? How do you measure desire? How do you measure love?
Can I interrupt?
Huh?
May I interrupt? I mean,
Yeah.
Isn't that what psychologists do? I mean, we have psychometric techniques to measure endless possible constructs. If we want to measure romantic... I'm sorry?
Not in physical terms.
I mean, not if in physical terms you mean that I need to map out the connectionist neuronal firing of each thought that I'm having, then of course that might be difficult for me to do today. But can I measure?
Even if you did that, all you'll be establishing is neurological correlates. There's no explanation. When we say we, who do you mean by we? When we're looking at the brain or finding explanations, who or what is it that is looking for those explanations?
Okay, let me step back then. Because we might get caught up in all sorts of esoteric conversations. I'm trying as a working scientist to the best of my ability to understand reality and nature as best as I can. Of course, the models are many times proximate, they're incomplete, sometimes they're wrong. What is it that epistemologically your approach brings that either negates what I'm trying to do or adds to it? Is it that you're arguing that you have a set of toolboxes that adds to the standard scientific toolbox, or is it that you're replacing it? I'm not quite following exactly what's happening.
The standard scientific toolbox helps us extend and navigate our experience of our life. So I tell you, meet at the corner of 56th and Broadway at 12 noon on a Thursday, and then we can go have Caesar salad at Serafina, we presume that that is what we're describing as reality. But what we're describing is human constructs. Okay, if I asked you, what is this? You might say, this is an iPhone. That's a human construct. If I asked you, what is this? You'll say, that's a hand. It's a human construct. The basic experience is actually just sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. And my epistemology and ontology says that reality is consciousness and how it modifies itself into experience. And raw experience is nothing other than sense perceptions, images, feelings, thoughts, period. The rest is a human construct. We have created a human universe. We have created a human civilization. And science can help us navigate experience, although we don't know what experience is.
Those natural realities don't exist outside of our constructs. If you weren't around with your human consciousness to experience them, wouldn't those physical properties still exist?
Well, if I showed a baby what is this, okay, the baby would experience color, taste, smell. It might try to eat it. It might play with it, throw it away, until I condition the baby to interpret this experience as a book. And then I tell the baby, this is a book, this is a hand, this is a body. When in fact, all there is consciousness modifying itself as experience. The rest is a construct. I'm not saying the construct is useless. The construct is very helpful in us creating this technology. But that doesn't tell us the meaning of life. It doesn't tell us the meaning of birth or death. It doesn't tell us what existence is. It doesn't tell us why we have existence or why there is awareness of existence. And these issues have been addressed by people throughout the ages. Only recently has science been dismissive. But right from Plato and Aristotle and Heidegger and all the great European philosophers, and Immanuel Kant, who spoke about the thing in itself, and Spinoza, and even Einstein addressed these issues. And then, of course, there were the Eastern philosophers who addressed these issues. But today, what has happened with science is total dismissal. So, if you talk to people like Neil Tyson Grass, Brian Cox, or Richard Dawkins, philosophy is useful. I would like to ask the scientists, when you look at the brain and try to understand the brain, is it your mechanical brain that is trying to understand its mechanical nature? Who or what knows your experience of mind, body, and universe? Science never asks that question.
So the way you started this last point, it reminded me of the split, if you'd like, that Stephen Jay Gould talks about, the late Stephen Jay Gould, when he talks about his NOMA principle, right? For our viewers who may not know what that is, that's the non-overlapping magisteria. So the idea that in his case, the dichotomy is religion versus science. And he was sort of an accommodationist. And he's basically saying, look, there are certain realms of questions that we want to ask or things that we want to know that are within the religious realm. Others are within the scientific realm. Is your view similar to him, but instead of using the word religion, you're using spirituality or some other word, but you're making roughly the same argument?
Not exactly, because you see, what I'm saying is no system of thought, whether it's religion or philosophy or theology or mythology or science, no system of thought can give you access to reality, because none of these systems of thought even tell us the origin of thought. So, the only way to understand reality is to go beyond thought, to transcend thought altogether. I'm reminded of something that the great Sufi mystic Rumi said. He said, God's language is silence. Everything else is poor translation. So systems of thought are human creations, and they create models of reality. And for those who are in the model replaces reality. But even scientists will tell you, even cognitive and neuroscientists, political scientists will tell you, we don't see the world, we see our models of the world. The religious person sees his or her model of the world. The theologian sees their model of the world. The scientist sees their model of the world. So they're all stuck in their constructs, and those constructs are valid for them.
Right.
But reality has to be, who or what would you be without a construct?
A few seconds ago, when you were giving one of your examples, you put up one of your books, Brotherhood, which one of your assistants kindly sent to me, along with You Are the Universe, your most recent book. So let me mention Brotherhood. How does your brother react or respond or accept or refute some of your theories? Are you both in sync? And I apologize if you've already covered that in the book. I haven't read it yet. I only received it yesterday. Is he in sync with you, or are there some really heated conversations at the dinner table between you two?
We've had heated conversations in the past, not recently. He's a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. He's a former dean of education at Harvard Medical School. He's very much embedded in the worldview of academia, which is the dominant worldview. What we call rationality today, Michael Shermer's rationality, for example, is basically the dominant worldview. But even rationalists can't tell you the source of thought. And, what happens is rationality depends on who holds the dominant worldview.
How many scientists have you interacted with that started off as non-believers, if I may use that term, or skeptical towards your ideas, that have since been converted to your worldview?
Very few. Very few. There are a few. Obviously, my co-author is a physicist for the other book, You Are the Universe. He holds my worldview. I do go to conferences on science and consciousness, ones held at the University of Arizona by Stuart Hameroff. There's another conference every year called Science and Non-duality. And all the scientists that come there are very vigorous in attacking the worldview that I'm speaking of right now. So I would say 95 to 99% of scientists don't agree with me.
Do you hold out, going back to the hope theme, do you hold out hope that one day in the not too distant future you will be vindicated for all of your ideas?
It doesn't ultimately matter. Now that I'm 70 years old, I realize that it ultimately doesn't matter. But I'm seeing a slow shift in the younger generation of medical students and other students who go into science, because we have a problem. If you can't explain any experience, then you can't explain the experience of doing science either.
Are there any spiritual-based ideas that you've espoused or promulgated at some point that you've since rejected? And if so, what was the evidentiary process? What was the epistemological process that allowed you to revise your prior beliefs?
So, my father was a cardiologist and he was a physicalist. He was trained in England. And he, towards the end of his life, did become very spiritual. But he was a humanitarian, by the way, and he did a lot of work, did a lot of charity. He would see patients free on the weekends. My mother would cook food for them. They made sure that the patients had enough money to get their bus fare. So when I started delving into consciousness and spirituality in the beginning, my father was quite kind of dismissive of my taking this detour. But then I brought him along, and by the time he was in his late 70s and became 80, he was totally in alignment with my worldview. My brother has come a long way too, and we agree on a lot of things. But let's say I started being as a physicalist, but I couldn't explain subjective experience at all. Slowly moved in the direction of the idealist philosophies in the West, whatever, Bishop Berkeley, and going back all to the way to Plato, etc. But then I realized that that wasn't actually something that totally satisfied me. It's very difficult. I had once a conversation with David Chalmers, the philosopher who coined the word hard problem of consciousness. And we were standing next to a table, and he kicked it and said, "I refute you thus," which was the famous refutation of idealism by Samuel Johnson. And I kind of realized that idealism wasn't satisfactory to me. And then, nowadays everybody is talking about panpsychism, which I embraced for a while, that consciousness is present from the subatomic level to the universe, something that Freeman has also hinted at, in his writings. He says every quantum experiment forces the atom to make a choice. And, when I had my famous debate with Richard Dawkins in Mexico, and I quoted Freeman Dyson, he kind of screamed at me. I thought he was going to have a stroke. He said Freeman Dyson couldn't have said that, and he should sue you. So I wrote to Freeman Dyson, and Freeman Dyson responded, and he said, there are three riddles that have occupied my attention all my life. Number one is the random. He didn't say random. He said the unpredictable movement of atoms. Number one, the unpredictable movement of atoms. I think there's a difference between random, inherently random, or unpredictable. I don't know what's going on. Number two, a universe that's fine-tuned for life and mind. And number three, our own consciousness. I don't know the answers to these riddles, but I think they may be connected. He copied me, Shermer, and Dawkins on the email, and Shermer had a reactive response, which I thought was totally inappropriate. And Dawkins said, "Take me off this list." So that was a while. I thought there was something to do, some truth maybe in panpsychism, but I've gone beyond all that. I'm a non-dualist. I think reality is one thing, whatever it is. You, me, the stars, the galaxies, or what we call the stars and galaxies, which are human constructs, bosons, electrons, electromagnetic fields, gravity, these are all human constructs, so modes of experience and modes of knowing. So you have to choose now. Is reality physical and then everything else has to be explained? Or is reality non-physical? And I am very comfortable with reality being formless, non-physical, spaceless, dimensionless, and yet the most real thing. So, as I said, if I ask you, what is this? You'll say it's a book, but that's a human construct. I will say this is an experience.
Right.
And then I will say, what is this an experience of, and who or what is having this experience? As a visual experience, it's a shape, it's a color, it's a form. As an auditory experience, it's this. As a tactile experience, it's this. As a taste and smell, it is whatever I'm tasting and smelling. Now, can I have an experience in the absence of an experiencer? And the answer, I believe, is I can't. There has experiencer and experience, and the experiencing have to go together. So seer, seeing, and scenery have to go together. Observer, observation, and that which is observed have to go together. So what is it that is the source of all three? Seeing, scenery, and seer. Observer, object, and observer. It can't be located, so it must not be as a form. If it's not, it doesn't exist as a form, then it is just the potential for experience. And that's ultimate reality. And today, even our scientific constructs are taking us there, in that direction, that if you reduce matter to energy, information, particles, waves, you end up with a superposition of possibilities. And that's all there is.
Do you think that one of the reasons why your dad, as he was aging, and your brother, as now he's getting older, might be more receptive to your ideas is precisely because there is, again, a hopeful message as your physical manifestation is approaching its end, hence, right, our mortality, our existential angst, then I certainly want to jump on the bandwagon of latching onto the possibility that there is this other dimension that currently is untapped that I can't get to, but I will go on. So in a sense, isn't some of your ideas, they become more palpable to each of us precisely because you're assuaging our mortality angst. And in a sense, then you're playing the same role, the same functional role as what religion does for us.
That's a misunderstanding, because I'm saying that you as a person are also a construct. There is no such thing as a person. A person is a process in awareness, in consciousness. So if you say I'm a person, Gad is a person, which one? The person was a teenager, an infant.
Right now, when I look at myself in the mirror and marvel at how gorgeous I am, that's not...
I know. But what you see in the mirror is not what you saw 10 years ago or what you'll see a year from now.
A bit fatter.
You would have seen as a baby. Right. So there's no such thing as a person. Once you realize that, there's no such... Even birth and death are constructs. Okay? The real you is not subject to death because you were never born.
Oh, boy.
This is the ultimate message of non-duality. That non-dual existence is pure consciousness without constructs. There's no person and there's nothing to worry about because the person never existed in the first place. There's no universe. There's no mind. There's no body. These are constructs.
Wow. Do you still have, I know we started a bit late. Do you have another 10 minutes? Because I'd like to ask you some... Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Deepak. So I want to move away from some of your work and sort of bring us back to...
By the way, if you don't mind, I'll send you an article that I just wrote for the Chronicle this week on this, and I'll send you another article that's coming out next week.
I'd love that.
Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so a couple of very non-esoteric issues, but I'd love to pick your brains because we're both also functioning in academia. What do you think of the utter campus lunacy that is transpiring before our eyes? The political correctness, the microaggressions, the safe spaces. What do you think of all this? Have you experienced it? Do you think that we're going to get out of this quagmire? What are your thoughts on all this?
Okay, you use the word micro-lunacy.
Microaggressions. Campus lunacy.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think we're living in a lunatic asylum. And we need to pick up our visitor's badge because we cannot do anything about it. Okay, the world right now is a total lunatic asylum. How can you call a world where there's eco-destruction, extinction of species, climate change, war, terrorism, mechanized death, nuclear weapons, and now the risk of our extinction? If you say that is normal, then you have declared your own lunacy as well. Okay, so I have decided there's nothing we can do about it. Pick up your visitor's badge, watch the show, because whatever it is, the mystery of the universe, it's soon going to exclaim the human species was an interesting experiment that did not work.
So, because my next book is supposed to track the confluence of forces that has led us to this sort of collective departure from reason. And it is my hope that my efforts and those of others will redress the ship. You're saying the ship is sinking? We're done? We're gone?
I think that would be the most rational conclusion, but I congratulate you for your book. The fact is, look at history, Gad. Look at history. Okay, was there ever a time when humans were not as brutal as they are today? There was never a time. The only difference is we have modern capacities now, along with medieval mythologies.
But Steven
And
Pinker, excuse me for interrupting you, Deepak. Steven Pinker would argue, if I understood you correctly, the exact opposite. He's saying that we are
yeah,
much less
that
violent
is,
today. You disagree
yeah,
with that premise?
no, maybe statistically he's right. It doesn't matter. We still are tribal, and our tribal minds now have nuclear bombs. So, and it's a different situation altogether. So, if Steven Pinker wants to quibble with statistics, that's fine, and so does Shermer about that. But I think we never before have been on the brink of disaster as we are today, because we are still tribal minds, and we have the capacities that we have right now.
All right, let me ask you this. You and I are both immigrants. In case you probably, I'm not sure if you took the time to find out a bit about my personal history. We are Lebanese
Yeah,
Jew. Oh, you did? Okay,
yes,
thank you.
yes.
So we are Lebanese Jews who escaped from Lebanon and moved to Canada. And of course, you came from India with your brother and built a outrageously successful life. So we both can easily appreciate the value of immigration and how to have open borders and have a humane immigration policy. But also, I think we both agree that having unadulterated open border policies where you let in endless people who might not share your cultural and religious values, or the values at least that define what you and I would call liberal, secular, modern societies, is also problematic. What are your thoughts about how we need to strike the right balance, remaining humane so that people like you have had the chance to come to the West and succeed, but also not being suicidal in our empathy? How do you strike that balance?
It's very difficult to give an answer because you have to look at the context. Most of the immigrants are coming from places which were colonies of Europe in the past. And, these people were basically the whole population was indoctrinated into a more attractive, materialistic world out there beyond their borders. Also, unfortunately, many of these places like Syria and etc. are ruled by despots and tyrants, and these poor people have no choice. I have immense compassion for immigrants, not only because of my history, because I see how it is adding to the suffering of the world. And some of it is uncontrollable, especially in Europe, it is uncontrollable. In the United States, right now, in the US at least, we have a policy that is racist and bigoted and ethnocentric and dangerous. Canada has a very good policy right now. If I were to embrace a policy, I would say it's something that would follow what the Canadians are doing with Trudeau's government.
Interesting that you said Canada, because earlier today, as I was doing some searches in preparation for our chat, I saw Deepak Chopra resigns as CEO of Canada Post. I don't know if you saw that.
Different guy. It's a different guy.
I know, but I didn't know that. So I said, God damn, this guy is busy. He's also CEO of Canada Post, till I realized that apparently it's not the same guy. There you go.
I am very fond of Canada. I think Canada, I don't know if you know, but the number one country in the world right now in terms of well-being is Denmark.
Right.
And number two is Canada in the entire world. And they're very close. I come to Canada every year, and I am very heartened by the fact that Canadians actually right now are welcoming Syrians and other refugees as an asset. Don't even see that as a problem. They think, some of these people will add to the economy and contribute to their technology. The United States has been the beneficiary in technology, all of Silicon Valley, of first-generation immigrants from not only India but many other parts of the world, but particularly from India, as has been as Canada. So if there was a medium course we could take, it would be the Canadian way.
Well, thank you. I will pass on your message to Justin Trudeau. Uh,
Yep.
I had one last question before we wrap up, but then I thought of another one. So let me ask two more questions. It seems to me that there are some similarities between the Jewish, so we are Lebanese Jews, the Jewish focus on education and knowledge, and the similar Indian reality, so that there's really quite a bit of similarity. Of course, we are a much smaller people than Indians, but there's this sort of obsessive focus that parents pass on to their children to always become more educated. And of course, your dad was a cardiologist. You and your brother became physicians. Do you see? Have you ever thought about the similarities between these two peoples?
Yes, very much. You know, the saying that in a Jewish family, you haven't grown up till you've gone through medical school or whatever. And in India, it's the same way. Mothers are very important in the Jewish tradition, as are they in the Indian tradition. I've been to Israel at least 5 times. Actually, I'm coming to Montreal in the next month to receive something called the Einstein Award.
Are you going to reach out to me so we hang out, or what?
I'll do my best. I'm only coming for 12 hours.
Oh,
but I am
rebuffed.
getting the Einstein
All right.
Award, and I'll get you an invite if you want to come.
Oh, that'd be good.
But I've been to Israel 4 times. I made a point of going and visiting Einstein's, library over there. And actually, my books, the first chapter is on a conversation between Einstein and the Indian sage Tagore.
Nice.
So do read that first chapter.
I will.
And then also the Jewish mysticism is very similar to the Vedic mysticism. And I've done some papers on the similarities.
Jewish mysticism meaning Kabbalah?
Kabbalah, yeah.
Okay, got it.
So, Yetzirah, and all those concepts and that are there in the Kabbalah. They're very similar to, and there's a mythical story that Krishna was a Yehudi. It's one of the lost tribes of Israel.
Yehudi,
So
by the
there's
way,
a lot
for the people who don't understand what Yehudi means, it means Jewish in Arabic. By the way, I'm not sure if you know this. And are you there? Because you froze a bit. Are you there? Can you see me?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, good, because you froze at one point. In Lebanon, on our ID cards, our religion is stated, and yet for Jews, it wasn't written Yehudi, it was written Israeli, which means Israelite, which, as I've explained before, it was a way to, if you want, increase the animus towards the Jews, because they were stripped of their Lebanese identities. They weren't Jewish Lebanese, they were Israelites. I thought you might...
Yeah, that's part of the politics, right?
That's part of the politics, yeah. Absolutely. Stay on the line just so that we could talk off air for a second. A true pleasure. Okay. I know you're a very busy guy. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat with me, Deepak. Sure. I hope you've enjoyed it. Sure. I've enjoyed it. And I
loved it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, buddy. Cheers.
Thank you, buddy. Yeah.